So, hello guys, welcome to today's session. Hello guys, welcome to today's session. And last week we started with the introduction to front-end development, and we were able to cover the basics of front-end development. We covered the basic structure of front-end development, the HTML tags that are necessary for you to, build a website. Then we also covered the basics of CSS as well, what CSS is used for. But today we'll be covering CSS in more details, and we'll be talking about CSS as a technology. We'll be talking about the nitty-gritties of using CSS, and hopefully by the end of this session you'd be able to have a better understanding of what CSS is and what it's used for. So let me share my screen. So first off, would be starting with CSS Fundamentals. Let me know if you guys can see that. Yeah, so this is what I have set up. This is what I have set up at the moment. Okay, so let's start with styling the web. Like I mentioned last week, HTML provides the structure for creating your website, and CSS basically just allows you to, it provides the enhancement of the site via decorations, text colors, background colors, changes, and all of that. So what's a CSS? Like CSS is called cascading style sheets, and the purpose of CSS is to allow us style and lay out our web pages. Now, without CSS, we would be unable to see pretty websites like we have today. Now, take for example, as you can see below, we have the Amazon website on the left here, on the right here, without CSS enabled. You can see how, how ugly it looks. This is just plain HTML on the side. And on the other end here, you can see how pretty the site looks with CSS enabled. And without CSS, this would not be possible. And on the other end, you can see it's just pure HTML. And this is the power of CSS. HTML provides the structure, and CSS provides the design. So moving on. So how does CSS work? First off, CSS works by, it allows you to select HTML elements that you want to style. Now, you can't do that without selecting an HTML element. Once you select an HTML element that you want to style, then you can go ahead and style that element using CSS. Now, the basis of CSS is that you have to style you have to select an element first and then apply styles to it. Then with CSS, it follows a cascading structure. So that's what hence its name, cascading style sheet. So if you had like a previous style applied to it before, and you want to apply a new style using the same selector, like using the same elements that you've selected, the new style that is applied is the one that is going to take precedence over the older style that was on the page. We'll discuss this in more details when we delve into coding. So that's how CSS works. So basically, it's looks at your previous styles, looks at your current styles, and then decides, okay, which style should I pick to apply. It picks the latest style on your style sheet and then chooses to apply that because it follows a cascading process. So let's start with linking CSS to HTML. Like I discussed last week, we need HTML for the structure and CSS for the styling. Think of your HTML as like the building structure, and think of CSS as your decorations, your paints, your paintings, how you lay out your sitting room, how you lay out how you put items in your building. So that's what CSS is for. And in order for that to happen, you need to ensure that HTML works with CSS. And how can we go about that? We go about that by first linking HTML to CSS. So in order for us to do that, we have three methods to applying CSS to HTML. We have the inline CSS, that is applying CSS directly to your HTML element. Then we have the internal CSS, which is applying CSS directly on the head element, not on the element that needs CSS itself. So you're going to add CSS to your head tag using the styles tag. That's the inline internal CSS. Now lastly we have the external CSS. With external CSS, you are required to have like a separate style file where you have all your styles and then you link it to your HTML through the head. And we use a tag for that. We use a link tag for linking this our CSS file to HTML. And it is usually recommended to always apply CSS to HTML using this approach and method. So let me go about demonstrating this for you. Don't know if you guys can see that. Just give me a moment. All right. Okay. So there you go. So I'll start by I have like some code samples here to show how to link your CSS. As you can see, we have our CSS, our HTML file here, which has all the structure. Like we have several tags. Like I mentioned last week, we have the heading tags, we have the paragraph tags, we have the div tags, and we have the about tag. And this is our CSS. In order for you to create a CSS style, you need like a CSS file. And how can you go about creating a CSS file? You go about that by, let's create a new one together. I'm creating a new one here. I'll just call it styling. You can name it whatever you want. Styling.css. And yeah, so I'm going to put it in the folder code examples. So this is, I have a CSS file right now, and this is where I can do all my styling and everything that I need to do. Now, in order for me to add these styles, let me do H1. So this is we'll talk about the structure of CSS in the nearest future. So this is me applying color blue to the H1 tag. This is a selector. We're selecting the H1 element. And in order for me to apply this to an HTML file, which is this, right, with several tags. Now let's look for where we have H1. This is H1 in our HTML document here. We're going to basically just try and link this styling.css file to our HTML file. I already have like a style linked to it before, but in order for us to do it from scratch without so you use the link tag to link your CSS to add CSS to your HTML. The link tag allows you to do that. And this is how you do it. You add your link tag in your ed tag, this ed tag in your HTML file. So what we do here is link relationship. We're specifying that what we're going to be adding is a style sheet. And then, okay, where are we going to get the style sheet from? That's what the href is all about. And this is a self-closing tag, so that's why we have this here. Okay, where do we get it from? We use a relative file, and then we select styling.css. Now let's have another view. Let's have another view where we can directly see our output. So window caption. So here is what the H1 looks like. As you can see, we have the color blue here. We have the color blue here. Now, in order for us to change this, I'm having to go through multiple steps to, show what I'm showing. Because I'm using a new software that I'm not really used to, but so in order for us to change the styling to make the H1 color maybe a little bit brighter, we can decide, oh, let's use green here. And once we switch to our other window, we should see that our H1 here is now green. As you can see, the H1 now looks green. So basically, this is how you link your, this is how you link your CSS style into your HTML file. This is how you link your CSS style into your HTML file. And yeah, so if you want to link another style file to your HTML, you can just come here, change the file name to styles.css, like we have over here. We have styles.css. This is the current styling that I have for this HTML document. And as you can see, switching from this, now my style is applied. You can see this is the original styling that I had for this session. Now my style is applied, and this is what the site looks like with CSS. Before now, the site was looking, you know, very ugly because it was just a plain H1 tag that we styled. But with the other styles, now it looks much more better. So moving on, that's how you link your CSS to your HTML file. And there are several ways to go about it. You can do internal styling, like, let me demonstrate that using this. Yeah, let me demonstrate. So over here, I can decide not to have any, I can decide not to link any CSS style into my HTML. And this is what my styling is going to look like. This is what my styling is going to look like. This is what it's going to look like without any CSS. As you can see, the images are big, the forms are a bit ugly, and you see the headings and everything isn't aligned. The layout is ugly, everything isn't looking nice as well. And the navigation comes with the default list tags that was used in the HTML. Now, in order for you to apply styling directly to the HTML document, what we can do is, using inline styling, we can come here, we can decide that we want style. You can add style like this. This is how you do inline styling. Style, list style type, list style type, none. So we're basically saying here, for this unordered lists, I want to ensure that the list style type is none, meaning I don't want to have any of that bullet list styling on this links here, this anchor links here. I don't want any of that bullet styling here. And then I can also decide text. So you can go on and on with your styling. You can decide on what text align, center. You can decide display to be inline. Now, when we check what our styles look like now in our HTML, this is what it looks like. Originally, it was aligned to this place, with your bullet list on there. We added like a center styling to it as well, as you can see over here. As you can see over here, we added a center styling to it, and then we also decided that we want to make it block styling instead of inline, actually inline. So make it inline. Sorry, just trying to share. I'm having to move from one screen to another using one software like that, so it's a bit difficult. I would need to... So here, this is what we do. We did the text align center, the style type none, and if you could recall, we didn't see the bullet list. Now this is another way you can apply your styling to directly to your HTML. Another method is coming here and adding your style tag. Now we're using the style tag, a style opening and closing tag, and we can basically, write styling like we have in a CSS file. So over here we can say UL, then LI, UL style, list style, list style type. We can say we want to use disk. I'm just going to remove this previous styling so we can see this implemented. List style type, we can decide for our text to be texts, font size, sorry, font size to rem, color, and decide for it to be this. And this is like an hexadecimal way of representing colors. So rather than using green, blue, yellow, and all of that, this is an hexadecimal way of representing colors. And now if we check our styling itself, we should see, we can see that these links, they've increased in size and they're basically applied to, what we have, like the styles are applied. So that's another way of including styles in your sheets by selecting the element you want to style and then adding styles over here. But it is usually recommended, and that's like the best, like industry standards, like this is the best way to go about adding styles to your sheet, using the link tag and using adding having a separate style sheet for every style you're adding to your HTML. So we're using styles.css over here. All right. So back to our. So now that we're done with that, let's move on to CSS selectors. Now, with CSS selectors, we, as you can see from the previous demonstration, we had to select an element and then add a styling to that element. Without selecting an element, you cannot style it. And this is how you go about styling in CSS. We have like you have to select an element, and that element, the naming of the element, we call it selectors. We have different types of selectors, and we have different ways of we have different methods of adding styles to a HTML file, and we can use different selectors. We have different selectors. We have simple selectors. We have pseudo classes and pseudo elements. We have complex selectors. Those are like different methods. With simple selectors, we can use the dot notation, the dot class to add styles to our HTML file, and then we can use pseudo classes and pseudo elements. With pseudo classes, we're saying when I do this on my HTML element, I want this to happen. That's what a pseudo class is. With pseudo elements, we're saying when I want to add something to my HTML element. I want to add something extra to my HTML element. And that selector allows you to modify an HTML element, and it allows you to add extra elements before or after, an HTML element. Now we have complex selectors. Complex selectors are basically combinators, like you're combining multiple selectors together to ensure that you're targeting specific parts of your HTML document. That's what complex selectors are. Now, this is the basic structure of a CSS styling. We have the selector first, which is the my CSS rule here. Now, here we're using class selectors. This this type of selector over here is called class selector. This my CSS rule is called class selector. And over here, the block over here, the curly braces, is known as declarations. Now the declaration block, inside the declaration block, we have several declarations. And declaration is basically just saying, I want you to apply this style to my selector, to my HTML element, which I've selected. Now, over here, we're saying the background should be red. We're saying whichever element has this selector, this my CSS rule selector, we want to apply a background red to it. This is another declaration, which is color beige. We're saying we want to, the text of this element, we want it to be a beige color. Now, this is another declaration. In a declaration, we have properties and value. The property is the part of the element you want to style. So we can say for color, we're saying we want to style this HTML element. We want to style the color of this HTML element. And the value is, okay, this is the value we want to assign to it. We want the color of this element to be this value. And this is the property over here. And this is the value we want to assign to that element. The font size is basically saying, oh, we want to change the font size of this selector. and we want to assign the value of 1.2 rem to it. Now there are different type of values when it comes to font scaling and font sizing. We have the pixel, we have the rem, we have the hems. So with the the pixel, it's basically just saying 1 pixel. We are determining the pixel by the value we assign to it. For 1 pixel, the browser determines, okay, this is what 1 pixel is, and that happens across all browsers. So with rem, we are saying we are associating a font size, the HTML font size, the typical HTML font size, which is around 16 pixels, right? We're saying for 1 rem, we want to assign 16 pixels to it. So for 2 rems is going to be 32 pixels. For 3 rems, it's going to be, 48 pixels. So that is what a rem is. So over here we're saying 1.2 rem. So we can say 16 times 0.2. So that's like 0.2 percentage of 16 pixels. That's the entire value. 16 plus 0.2 percentage of 16 pixels. That's the entire value of the font size we're applying to this CSS selector over here. This would work on this later on, and we'll show how this can be applied to your styling. So we have common CSS properties over here, like I mentioned earlier: color, font, text, and we have the box, right? With the boxing, we're basically saying we want the entire width, the entire height, the entire box that this element is contained inside. We want it to be a specific type of size. So let me just go about the demonstration here. So let me go back. So the first part of this is we're going to start with applying styles to. We're going to use the previous styling that we have here. Now, as you can see, we are selecting a specific element over here, right? And we are saying the body element, the body HTML element, we want to apply a font family of Arial, and we want to apply the line height. We want the text to be a line height of 1.6. I want the margin and the padding to be 0 and 0. That means we're explicitly saying that the body of our HTML page, we don't want any margin, we don't want any padding. And we're saying the color of our background should be this color, this hexadecimal color. Now, this is what the HTML looks like. Now, as we can recall, the body is where your entire HTML is wrapped in. Like, that is where your content for your page is inside. And without the body, you don't have an HTML document. You basically are not going to be able to display anything. So that's what the body is used for. Now, in the body, we have the header. This header, we're saying, let's style this header using background color of 2C3E50. That's like the hexadecimal color of like greenish, right? We're saying this is the background color we want to use, and this is like a common color selector. It's a common color property, background color. is a common color property. We have color as well. That's another, you know, color property. Padding is, we're basically saying we want to style the width, the padding of the let's move on to box model first before we start talking about common CSS properties. So in CSS we have we have sorry, I'm trying to show. In CSS we have this ideology that everything on your page is a box, right? Now, when we say everything on your page is a box, we're explicitly saying even your text is a box. And within that box is where you have your content, whatever you specify in your CSS, in your HTML file, sorry. Whatever you specify in your HTML file. So if you use the p tag, we're saying inside your p tag, whatever you put inside that p tag is the content of the box. Now, within that content, you have a margin. So say, for example, this is like a p tag. This is the content over here, right? Now, within that content itself, we have a padding, and we have a border, and we have a margin. So the padding is explicitly saying, oh, this content, I want it to have a spacing between this content and the border of this content. We want a spacing between the content and the border of this content. That's what a padding is. Now, the border of this content is basically, we're explicitly saying this is a border, for example. This is a border, right? Now, the border of this content is determined by the width of the border itself. So we can say we want to apply 1 pixels of border to this content. Now, when we apply 1 pixels to this content, it is going to have like a border of 1 pixel black, right? It depends on whatever color we want to apply to the border itself. So we can say 1 pixel solid black, and we'll do a proper demonstration, but the whole ideology behind CSS is that for every content you have on your HTML page that you're applying CSS to, we have the content, we then have the padding, which is wrapped around the content, then we have the border, which is wrapped around the padding, and then we have the margin, which is wrapped around the border itself. So typically for every element in your HTML, we have the main content, the padding, the border, and the margin. That is what, when you apply styling to your HTML element, that is what you would see on your screen. Now, with HTML, with CSS, we have like two type of sizing for these boxes. Now, when you have like a box that says you're applying a width of 200 pixels, let's just go to demonstrating this. That's it. So say you're applying a width I'll just remove this styling for now, and then let's do this section ID I'll use the new styling, which is styling.css. So I'm just going to apply the new styling, not the one that has everything in it. So styling.css. Now we're going to style this section, right? Let's style this section. This section has an ID of home, and in order for you to select this section, right, we can use an ID. You can say ID, sorry, home. So we are explicitly saying we want to select this element, any element that has an ID of home. That is what the styling is. Any element that has an ID of home, we want to give it a width of, let's say, 50 pixels. 50 pixels. Now, when you view this item, let me switch to the main window itself. So you can see over here we can see that this section, over here we can see that this section that we just picked, that has an ID of home, that has the content of welcome to CSS Cafe. Let me just add a border for you so you can see. Border 1 pixel. Sorry, I have to constantly switch to this so you can see what I'm doing. Window capture to, okay. So border 1 pixel solid red. This is the value we're assigning to this property. And with CSS, you have to, in order for you to apply a styling, you have to have a handing column to it to ensure that, okay, you're done with this styling. In order to move on to the next styling, another declaration, we have to have a column at the end of each declaration. So I'm applying a border to any element with the ID of home. And in our HTML, we can see that we're using a section tag over here with the ID of home. So when we come to our, let me just increase this styling here. Let's make it 4 pixels instead of solid 1 pixel. So 4 pixel would make it much more thicker and much more visible for you to see. Now, when we switch to our content itself, you can see we have a border around the content itself. That is to show you that everything in CSS is like a box. So this is a box. This is the content within the box. And as you can see, it is overflowing, right? It is outside of the box itself. This is because we've set like an explicit width for this box. We're saying this box, we want it to have 50 pixels. Now this is 50 pixels. This width of this box is 50 pixels. Now, because the content within the box itself is much more than 50 pixels, right? It is much more than 50 pixels. We are saying the content is going to overflow the box. It's going to, be much more larger than the box. Now, this is what we call extrinsic sizing. Now, extrinsic sizing is basically saying we're applying a specific width to the box, and we're saying we don't care about the content. We just want the box and whatever is within this box to be this width, to be this size. That is what we are saying here. And we explicitly mentioned that the width of this box is going to be 50 pixels, and we can see that the content within this box itself is much more than 50 pixels. Now, in order for us to fix this, we have something called intrinsic styling, right? Intrinsic styling is we are saying the content would determine the size of the box. We are not explicitly saying, oh, this is what we want the size of the box to be. We are saying the contents within this box, we want it to determine the size of the CSS box itself. And how we can go about that is, let me go to the code here. Yeah. Okay. So how we can go about that is we remove this. We can either remove this width and just allow the content to be extrinsically, sized and contain its full width, or we can say intrinsically sized, sorry, not extrinsically sized. By removing this width, we are saying we want it to be intrinsically sized. We want the size of the box to contain whatever content we are applying to that box. Now, over here, I'm just going to say max width or min width. Fit content. So what this means is we're saying the minimum width of this box, that red box that we had before, the minimum width should be the size of the content itself, right? The size of the content. Now, without any width at all, this is what we'll see. Let me switch to here. Without any width or specifying any width at all, this is what we're going to see. And this is a block element. That's ID, that box, the element that we applied the styling to is a block element. Now, in order for us to make it fit the content without over making it much more larger than the content, we can specify in our styling that we want the display for this element to be inline block. So when we do this and we switch to our stain itself, we can see that the content fits the box itself. The content, it fits the box itself. And this is because we're saying this section, that ID that we selected, the ID of home, that element with the ID of home that we selected that we want to style, we're specifying that we want it to be inline block. Now, when we say inline block, we're saying we don't want it to be a block element that it takes the whole width of the screen. We want it to be inline, meaning it should take just the size of its content, but we also want it to be block in the sense that we want the content itself to, behave like a block element, but we want the content to be inline. Inline meaning we don't want it to take much more than its content, but a block element would always take much more than the content. It would take the available screen. That's what a block element does. But inline elements just take whatever size that the content has. So we're saying inline block. We want it to behave like an inline element. Take whatever size that you have, right? Like behave like an inline element, which is take the size of your content, but at the same time, we want you to behave like a block element, meaning we don't want any other element to come close to you. We don't want any other element to be like beside you. That's what inline block is. So as you can see, the box now fits the content itself, and it's not overflowing beyond the box. That is what is happening over here. So that is what like intrinsic sizing is. Intrinsic sizing basically means your content would determine what your box size would be. Your content will determine what your box size would be. And extrinsic sizing means your content. Extrinsic sizing means your content. I'm sorry, I'm just saying this. Extrinsic sizing means your content. Anyways, so basically, I was saying intrinsic sizing means your content would, the box would be determined by your content, and extrinsic sizing means your content would, the box would be determined by you. The sizing of your box would be determined by you. So you are explicitly saying, I want this box to be this size, and it doesn't matter what your content is. It doesn't mean, it means that your content can overflow or not. It depends on what is inside the box itself. If the content inside your box is, if the content inside your box is within the width specified for that box, it's not going to overflow. But if the content inside your box is much more than the width specified, it's going to overflow. So that is the difference between extrinsic sizing and intrinsic sizing in CSS. And we do that by ensuring that we specify a specific width for our box. So let's move on to this specific part. So let's talk about common CSS selectors. Now, as you can see over here, we selected home, right? We're saying any HTML element that has the ID of home, we want to select that, and we want to apply these styles to it. That is what is happening here. Now, there are various methods for you to select HTML elements in CSS. Now we'll start with the simple selectors. Now I can say, instead of making this an ID, this is an ID selector, right? I can say, let's make it a class. A class. Now, with a class, we're basically saying, I want to select this section element that has the class of home. Now, in order for you to select this section element that has the class of home, we can come here and say, no, not here. We can come here and say, instead of the hash or the pound sign, we're going to use a dot. Now, this dot is specifying I'm looking for any HTML elements that has the class attributes on it with a value of home, right? Now, this section element, it has the class attribute on it with the value of home. That is what this selector is going to. So it means that this selector is going to apply these styles, this declaration to this HTML element over here. That is what is going to happen. And in order for that to happen, you have to use selectors, CSS selectors. And we have different type of selectors. And these are like some of the simplest selectors that you can use. So we used ID before. And in order for you to represent ID in your CSS selector, use the pound sign and then whatever value you assigned to your CSS selector over here. We used home, so because it's the ID attributes that we used, we're using the pound sign. But if it's the class attributes that we used to apply styling to this element, we would use the dot sign. That is what we would use. Now, give me a moment. So now, now that we've talked about that, let's talk about universal selectors, type selectors, class selectors, ID selectors, and then attribute selector, and then group selectors. Let's start with universal selectors. Now, when we do this, and we say font size, 18 pixels, font family Roboto or sans serif, font margin 0, padding 0. Now over here, this is what is called a universal selector. Let me just comment this out. Let me comment this out. So I'm just going to name this universal selector. Universal selector. Now, what this does is it basically allows you to apply styling to your HTML document, regardless of whatever it's in it, right? We're saying apply all the styles to all elements in my HTML document. Apply all of the styling to all the styles in my HTML document. Now, how that is done is using this universal selector, and basically that's what this does. And you don't need to specify it in your HTML document. You don't need to explicitly say, oh, this is where I want you to apply this selector. It is going to be applied to every element in your HTML document. Now, we move on to type selectors. Now basically type selectors allow you to style HTML elements themselves. We're saying, oh, UL, and we're saying list style type none, text decoration none. So this is an HTML element in your HTML element, and basically this is a type selector because we're explicitly saying, oh, we're looking for any HTML element in our document with this type UL, and we want to apply styling to that HTML element. We can say font size 24 pixels instead of 18. 24 pixels. Font family, or we can say we want to have a padding of 2 rem. Want to have a margin of 8 rem, and basically what happens here is that we're saying this is the type we want to apply these styles to, and in our HTML look for this type, this element of type UL, and apply this style to this element. That is what this style is all about. Now we have another type of selector which is called the class selector, which we already discussed earlier on, but we will discuss it again just for clarity's sake. A class selector is denoted by dot, and you might have to say heading, and for each heading we want to use a font weights of bold. We want to make our heading font size of 38 pixels, or 42 pixels. Then we can also come here, we can say the font family is Arial. Now what we're saying over here is, so basically with every font you want to give it like a Arial, and then maybe if this doesn't exist, let's give it sans serif. So with every font family we're saying we must have a backup, and with over here we're saying select apply the font family Arial to this heading with the class selector heading, or if this font family doesn't exist, apply sans serif to this heading. So that's what this is. And then over here, in order for you to apply that class to your element, you use the class attributes, and then you say heading. Now this, sorry, I didn't. This heading would be applied to this welcome to CSS Cafe. Let's check it out to see for ourselves. Welcome to CSS Cafe. As you can see over here now, our heading is much more larger because we applied that class to it, and you can see every other thing remains the same, but now our heading is much more larger. So that's how you use a class selector. We can do the same using an ID selector, and how you do that is you come down here and we can say paragraph. So we can specify here that we want our font size for the paragraph to be 12 pixels, and we want the font family to be Roboto, or we want it to be sans serif if Roboto doesn't exist. Now, this is an ID selector, and in order for you to use an ID selector, you come here. Now let's apply that styling to this paragraph element over here, and we say ID is paragraph. Yeah. Now let's switch back to our styling over here. As you can see, the paragraph element itself is now reduced. The font size of that element is now reduced, and it is now being applied. So that's another type of selector in CSS. So let's move on to another selector, which is the attribute selector. Now, how we go about attribute selector is we can say we're looking for elements that have a certain HTML attribute. Now, within this attribute selector itself, we have like various types of way to select an element with a particular attribute. Now, what is an attribute? Attribute is basically it enhances an HTML element. We're saying we want to enhance this element by using this attribute on it. Now, it helps like an HTML to behave a certain kind of way. So when we use an attribute on an element, we are saying we want this element to behave a certain kind of way. Now, your class, like we saw earlier on, is an attribute. The class is an attribute. The ID is an attribute. Anything that you find within an HTML element, this class is an attribute. I'm trying to look for this type is an attribute. In our form here, this type is an attribute. This placeholder is an attribute. So anything within your HTML element that enhances its functionality, right? And it enhances the functionality of that element, we're saying it's an attribute. Now, we can style an element using an attribute too. And how we go about that is we use a square bracket. We use a square bracket and then we specify which attributes we want to. Let me use a type of text. Okay. Sorry about that. So we use a type of text. So we are explicitly saying, look for any elements with this attribute, right? Let me comment this out. ID selector. Class selector. Can't type today. Class selector. Type selector, just so you're aware of type selector, and this is a universal selector. Okay, so over here we're doing the attribute selector. So what this basically means, like I mentioned earlier, is we're looking for any elements with the attribute of type equals to text, and in our HTML file here, this is the only HTML element that has this attribute. And what we can do is we can say, let's style it. Let's say the border is 2 pixels solid gray. So we're saying the border around that input element is going to be 2 pixels solid gray. You can also say the padding within that element itself is going to be 2 pixels, right? No, let's not make it 2 pixels. Let's make it 1 pixels. Then we're saying, what else can we do? We can change the color of the text inside the font to be red. So when we test this, when we go ahead to test this on our site, we should see, yeah, this is it here. This is the element with the type. Wait. Yeah, this is the only element with the type text. And so this is the only element with the type text, and as you can see, it has a border of gray, 2 pixels of border gray. And then if we type inside, you can see the text is red, right? The text is red, and for every other element, the text is black. The border is the regular styling that comes with the default browser. You can see. So because we have an attribute of type text on this element, this input element, that is why that style is being applied to this element itself and not any other element. And that is what we call attribute selectors. And that's how you style using attribute selectors. Now there are various other methods that you can use for styling attribute selectors. You don't have to specify type text. You can just say any attribute with type yeah, any HTML element with the attributes type, we want to style it like this. Now, if you go back to our HTML element, you can see this attribute, this element is now, it now has like the border of 2 pixels solid gray. The name also has the border of 2 pixels solid gray. Now, if you type in anything here too, you can see they both have the red applied to it over here. You can see now the style is being applied to both elements, including this button, because it has a type. It has a type, and I'll show you that when I switch over to the code. So the only one that the only element that it's not being applied to is the text area element, and that's because this doesn't have a type. So let's switch back to code, and we should see that in our elements, you can see the text as a type, the email as a type. The text area does not have a type attribute. It has a placeholder attribute. The button itself has a type attribute. So we selected all elements with the type attributes, and we said, okay, apply this style to all elements with the type attribute. So basically that's what like the attribute selector is. And finally we have the group selector. Now group selector is basically saying, so let me come here, attribute selector, group selector, where is my star? Okay, group selector. Now group selector is basically saying, I want to apply styles to various elements at the same time. That's what a group selector is. And you can do that with this. You can do that with, okay, let's say h1 element. I want to apply a style to this h1, so I'm writing the selector right now, and then you put a comma beside it. I want to also apply it to a style with content sizing. So this is a class selector, right? Then I can say, let me use an ID selector. I put a comma beside it. Let me see if I can use maybe the input section. Yeah, that's another selector, right? This is an ID selector. Then I can say I want to select all elements with, I'm looking for a specific attribute. Okay, I can say I want to select all elements with class attributes, right? Class attributes. Now you can see that we have like various elements selected. This is how you style multiple elements together in CSS. You group them together. Now over here we say h1, any element that is h1 of type h1, any class that is of type, any what's it called, any class selector that is of type content sizing, that has the value of content sizing, any ID selector that has the value of inputs, and any attribute selector that has class, any attributes that, any element that has the attribute of class, right? Any element that has the ID of inputs, any element that has the class of content sizing, an early H1 element within my HTML document. I want to apply these styles to. Now, background color. I'm going to be applying a background color of, let's say, black. I want to make the color within it white. I want to give it a padding of 6 or 2 rem. I want to also give it a margin of 2 rem. Then I want to, do I want to apply a border? No. What can we do? What can we do? Yeah, let's give it a width of 50 pixels. So this is extrinsic sizing. We are explicitly saying all contents, all elements with this ID element, class selector, ID selector, and this type element. We want to apply a width of 500 pixels to it. This is extrinsic styling. That means I don't care what content is within them, but this is the width I want to give them. Now, if I go it's going to look ugly, but this is just for demonstration purposes. Let's go to our window capture. As you can see over here, we have as you can see over here, sorry. Okay, as you can see over here, we have a background. As you can see, we also have elements overflowing from the box itself, right? You can see we have elements that are outside of the box itself. These images, they are outside the box. These images, they are outside the box. But let's make it much more attractive. Instead of doing that, let's use an existing style. So I'm going to change this to styles.css. Now we should understand what a group selector is. Now when we come back to the element itself, this is a group selector over here. We're saying for every H1 and every H2 element, we want to give it a color of this. Now these are the H1 and H2 elements within our file. Our menu and welcome to CSS Cafe, about us, and contact us. So when we go to the browser itself, you can see where we have these colors for this, for this, for this, and for this. So that's what group selector is. You can say, you can decide to apply a specific styling to multiple elements, and you do that using group selector. And yeah, so I think we've already gone through most of the common CSS properties. We have like color to style the color of an element. We have various properties within color. We have background color. We have font to style the text of an element. We have font family to decide, okay, this is the fonts I want to apply to this element. And we have font size to determine the size of this typography. We determine how large or how small we want our font to be. The font weight, decides or what's font size or how bold or thin our font should be, right? That's what we use font for. So that's another CSS property. For text, we decide how do we align text? Should we add a decoration to the text? Um, for box, like we mentioned, to style the box itself, we use width, we use height, we use margin, we use padding. And just for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to go back to code here and show you where we have like padding within our style. So over here, now this is a group selector. This is a group selector. We still have some other things to deal with, by the way. This, we basically just went through like simple selectors today. And in our next section, we're going to be covering pseudo classes and pseudo elements, as well as complex selectors that you can use to style your elements. But for today, we're going through the simple selectors. So ignore this part, right? But basically, it's a group selector, because we're saying menu item, select all elements with a class attribute that has the value of menu item, and we want to select all attributes, all elements with the attributes with a class that has the value of menu item and that has a child of p element. We're saying, okay, this menu item with the child of h3, right? So let's come here, menu item. So this is a typical example. We are selecting this menu item. It has a child element of h3. That is what this is going to be styled with, this element here. This padding, it will have a padding of 0 and 1 rem. Now, menu item with the child of p, the p tag, it would have this styling of let's look for the elements with that menu item with the style of p tag. So you can see this, so they both these elements over here, all these elements over here, they're going to match the selector. They're going to match the selector. We're basically saying select all elements with this menu item h3 and menu item paragraph tag, and we want to apply this style. We're declaring the padding to be 0. So when you see a styling like this, it means on the x-axis apply 0, on the y-axis apply 1 rem. So that's what this means. Typically, when you have just one value, we are saying apply the styling to all axes, the x and the y axis, apply 0 to all styling. But here, so we're saying apply a padding to 0 and 1 rem. Now let's have a look at what that looks like over here in our the menu item here. So if you inspect this element, we are adding a padding here. You see this element over here has a padding on the y-axis, on the x-axis, sorry, not on the y-axis, x and y, has a padding on the x-axis. So the green here, this is how you go about inspecting an element, you come here, you right click on your tab, click on inspect, and then you come here, you select an element that you want to inspect on your page. I'm selecting this element here, the H3 element. As you can see, it's already showing me that the H3 element, and it's showing me that I have a padding of 16 pixels on the y-axis. Wait. Oh, sorry. So because we have like two, it's not the y-axis, it's the x-axis. Because we have like two, because we have like, typically when you have margin padding elements like that, we have four corners, right? Four corners, one, two. For every element, you have four corners. Remember the box, right? For every element, you have four corners. Now, to style those four corners using the margin and padding or width and height, you can specify, for margin and padding, you can specify four values. For if you specify four values, you're specifying the top, the left, the bottom, and the right. If you specify just two values, you're specifying the top and the bottom, and the right and the left. Now, in this case, we're saying the padding is, let me go back to the code here. In this case, over here, we're saying the padding, we're specifying, instead of specifying four, we're specifying just two. So that means for the top and the bottom, we have 0 padding. For the left and the right, we have 1 rem padding. So that's what, so the padding over here is being applied to these two elements. The green is the padding. And how you can know that is by going to, once you select an element, right? Once you select an element here, and you come here, you can see the padding. This is the box model, by the way. The padding, the content itself, the padding, the border. You can see we have no border on this element, and the margin. We have a margin on this element, and that is how CSS is basically styled. So this is, I was talking about the group selector before now, and oh, I wasn't showing. So let me talk about that again. In order for you to see the styling, you click on this element. Once you've done your inspect, after right clicking on your browser, then you click on this mouse icon over here, and then you select the element that you want to check. I'm going to be checking this H3 element, and then you scroll down to the last part of your styles here, styles, and over here you can see the element itself. It's a box, right? The box has a padding. Now you can see there's no padding applied to the top and the bottom here. It's just to the left and the right. But there's no border as well applied to the element, which is this element here. There's no border applied to it, but there's a margin applied to the border on the top and the bottom. So that is how you inspect your elements, and that is how you understand how elements are styled in your CSS. So that's going to be it for today. If there are any questions, I apologize for not setting up the stream properly. At the moment, I don't think we're able to have a live chat. But if there are any questions, we're going to drop a feedback form. I would answer those questions in our next sessions. So you can drop your question in that feedback form, and I'll answer these questions in our next session. So thank you guys for today. In the next session, we'll talk about more selectors and how you can manipulate, your HTML elements and target HTML elements in a much more complex manner. So that will be all for today. All right, thank you guys.